We're in the midst of a series on a book called The Untethered Soul. I think last week I told you I wanted to throw the book at the wall. This week I wanted to burn it with fire. Because there's nothing like taking a look at our attachments to have the universe show up and say, oh, you are very attached. In this book study, The Untethered Soul, the byline is the journey beyond yourself. And in Unity, we have a lot of our history in turning within. The concept of we live first from the inside out. Doesn't mean we're not paying attention to the outer circumstances, but it's what's happening within us that is our place of power. And while it's wonderful that we focus on that a lot in Unity, one of the reasons I'm a Unity minister is that I believe there's power in taking that work that we've done on the inside and living it out into the world. There are many ways that we can do that. I recently had dinner with one of our congregants, and I think I must have been complaining about the DC traffic. Some of you may know that my daughter studies at the Washington School of Ballet, and that means that we are downtown at Northwest by the cathedral 4 and 5 days a week. So yesterday, I didn't feel like hanging out at the bakery or the bookstore. So I took her, I drove home, and then I went back to get her and drove home. And it was one of those days, I'm sure, recently when I was speaking to my friend, and I said, I don't understand people. And she just looked at me and she said, when I moved here, I made a commitment that I was going to be the nicest driver Washington, D.C. had. I thought, well, you deserve sainthood. Especially after the construction I sat in yesterday twice. When we think that we have it all wrapped up, the universe gives us opportunities to go, oh, really? And so traffic seems mundane, but that's part of our experience here. So can we, being the peace that passes understanding behind our steering wheel, make a difference in the world? I know that I get pretty committed to proving these teachings. So if we focus on it, we declare it, we want to make it so, and then I pick up this book that talks about I'm neither my affirmative thought nor my negative thought. I go, what do we do with this? And so this week I've had a couple conversations with some of you that said, I don't know how to reconcile my affirmations with the untethered soul. I know I'm ready to just go back to the affirmations and denials. Yet in this book, Michael Singer challenges us to be willing, to be patient, as Lorna reminded us with the daily word, to be patient with our reaction, to first observe those thoughts, to observe what it is that's happening in the mind. Well, this week, one of the chapters that we're focused on has a beautiful little story that I had the opportunity to live yesterday. Having read this chapter probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, I forgot it until I was sitting in bed at 10:30 last night, and I read this and thought, that's what happened to me today. The author's talking about going beyond our comfort zone, going beyond the walls that we've created to protect ourselves. He says the level of discomfort and disorientation you may feel going beyond these walls may be an experience that's frightening. You're struggling just to get back some semblance of normal perception once you're willing to go past your comfort zone. What you're really trying to do is to pull the mental model back around you so you can settle down into your familiar mental setting. But let's say that you're really ready to do an experiment. You're ready to see if you can sit through an inner urge to go down one of those trails of thought. Here's an example. There's a reason why we dress the way we do. There's a reason for everything we do. If you want to see why you care so much about what you wear and what your hair is like, then just don't do it one day. Wake up in the morning, go somewhere disheveled with your hair a mess, and see what happens to the energies inside of you. See what happens when you don't do the things that make you comfortable. What you'll see is why you're doing them. So on my many trips in the car yesterday, I had on a sweatband, sweatshirt, workout clothes, no makeup. And I decide, in all my comings and goings, I really should go to the grocery store while there's still toilet paper on the shelf, right? So I look in my basket. I have a handful of items, and I see the 2 lines that have 6 people deep. And then there's the express lane. I go, well, these 3 bananas, they're really one bunch, so I have 10 items. I can go through there. Don't you know, I turn around and there's a man behind me, and he's got 3 things in his hand, and so of course I go, oh, I really have 13 if I count each of these bananas. Please go before me. And there's something familiar in the moment when I say that, and he walks around me, and I hear, well, hello, Reverend. And I'm like, oh, dear God, look at my hair. Look at my face. Oh! Am I a little invested in, when I hear the word reverend, looking a little more reverend-like? Just a little. I was like, shoot, I thought I was going to a grocery store. I wouldn't see anybody I knew. And what I found was I got so wrapped up in my own inner chatter, I couldn't find my credit card. I couldn't find my frequent shopper card. The people behind me were like, oh. I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. The truth was, it was just out of context. But when we find ourselves outside our comfort zone, the universe will show us what our growing edge is. And that's really what going beyond yourself is about. It's knowing that we have spiritual teachings, we have a meditation practice, we have books that we read, we have relationships with friends and community where we are able to live these teachings. And yet it is how we show up in the world after we finish together on a Sunday morning that makes a difference. As I read this book and it said to go beyond, I began to say, well, when is enough enough? When is enough enough? And I was reminded of a story. It's a man named Peter. Peter and his wife lived on the East Coast with their 2 children, and they got that phone call one day. Peter's mom called and said, your dad's not doing well. It's time for you to come see him. The hospital says now's the time. And Peter and his wife began to get into that train of thinking of, okay, how do we make this happen? We have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old. They're off at summer camp. How are we going to introduce them to this experience of Grandpa's death? And that train of thought only went on for a few hours. Peter's wife looked at him and said, we could make this a very sad trip. We could hurry out to Michigan, spend some time with your dad and Grandma, try to get the kids back in time for their next camp. Or we could create the vacation of a lifetime. What if we took a different train of thought and chose to create a different experience for ourselves? Well, Peter writes in this story that one of his key spiritual practices is to declare the intention that he wants to experience, and then to set down the expectation. To set down and not cling to it has to be a certain way. So they declared the intention that in an ideal world, Grandpa would rally, and they'd have a great week together. And maybe Grandpa would have a few more months. And so they made the choice to go get the children from camp. They boarded the plane, flew to Michigan, and instead of the economical car that they typically would rent, they got a town car. And as they drove the shore of Lake Michigan up to where the grandparents lived, they stopped several times to look at nature, to really be present to each other before they showed up with family. And in this story, Peter says that throughout the 5 days they were there, they carved out special time for Grandpa to be with the children, for Peter and his father to have that beautiful conversation that so often, when we're close to the edge of the end of life, we're willing to say those things. They even brought Grandpa his favorite candy, a certain kind of chocolate-covered mints. Well, it was a wonderful week. The children created lifelong memories of their grandfather, not around the hospital and not around sickness, but around family and relationship. And so after 5 days, they went home, and Grandpa did indeed rally for 2 more months. And while Peter went back twice to see his father, the family didn't return until it was time for the funeral. And after the funeral, Grandma called the family into the kitchen. And she showed them the Polaroid picture of the 4 of them, Mom, Dad, and 2 kids, that had been at the foot of the bed of Grandpa for the last 2 months, because it exemplified the joy of that time together. She said, he's left us one gift. She opened the refrigerator, and in that box of mints, there were 6. 1 for each of them, 1 for her, and 1 to remember Grandpa. Now, I don't know about you, but I have to wonder in this story is if Mom and Dad had decided this is going to be a very sad occasion, we're introducing our children to death, this is the road that we have to go down. I wonder if it could have been a celebration at that funeral, if they could have had the sweetness of those joyful moments. Sometimes in our mind we think we have to do things a certain way. The untethered soul says, just because you think you have to do it a certain way, simply step back and pause and ask if there's another way. I believe part of the value of looking at this level of self-awareness is to identify a couple of important self-beliefs. What do we believe about ourselves? And do we believe we have a choice in choosing those thoughts? Well, one of the insights I've had with this book is that I really have no personal problems. What I have are persona problems. What part of myself am I tapped into when I'm flying off at the handle? When I'm frustrated with the drivers? Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, says this in his book, The 12 Powers. The human being exists in the subconsciousness as a multitude of people. The wise person, the foolish person, the kind person, the cruel person, the loving person, the hateful person, the poor person, the rich person, the timid person, the courageous person, the sick person and the healthy person, the erratic person, the sane person. These and 1,000 other types of people, as active personalities, occupy the consciousness of every human being. What if we don't need to make our thoughts right or wrong? We just step back and look at that spectrum of perception and go, oh, I know who's responding to, I don't have on makeup in the grocery store. I think it's probably the little girl that used to shop with her grandmother, who would always get fancy to go to the grocery store. Lipstick. So the perception of, what if someone sees me? That persona that says, if I'm known in this way, I should look a certain way. When I first got here 2 years ago, I remember someone on staff going, "Please don't wear a suit on Sunday morning." I said, "Well, I've worked at that church and I gave most of those suits away, so no worries. I have an Easter one. I have a funeral one, but that's it." We all have ideas of how we're supposed to show up. I'm wondering if in the midst of that conversation with our mind, instead of making one train of thought right and one train of thought wrong, we can do 2 steps. We can simply acknowledge the thought and whatever feeling it's created, and then we can shift to gratitude. Gratitude for the thought. Do you see the shift? We don't have to judge the thought as right or wrong, good or bad. We simply embrace the thought. And in embracing it, we give thanks for how it has served us. And that can be challenging when we're in the midst of a heated conversation with a colleague at work. Yet what would life be like if all we did was take 3 deeper breaths before we responded? And what if on that 3rd breath we said, "Oh, I know which persona this is. It's my get it right persona. It's my, oh, I know more information than you know persona." And once we identify it, give thanks for how it has served us in our life. And then can we release it? Can we let it be? Gratitude is a tool I invite you to take into your week. And instead of being grateful for something someone else does or someone else says, be grateful for yourself. Be grateful for the level of awareness that you live in. The Iroquois people define gratitude as the words that come before all else. What if before we get out of the bed we feel that gratitude? Breathe it in. Not for a thing or a person or a situation. We breathe in the gratitude because they are words that come before everything else. What if that's what we do? What if we feel gratitude and look at the wisdom traditions from the native peoples, and we really, really trust that while we may have a plan for our day, I like my little calendar, it helps me get where I'm supposed to get on time. Can we, in those moments where perhaps we're running behind, just acknowledge our thought or feeling, and then just feel grateful for the feeling? Thank you for reminding me it's a high value that I show up on time. I'm not going to do that this moment. I believe that when we show up in gratitude to our situations in life, no matter what is happening with the other person, we have now taken a peaceable stand. We've now taken a gratitude stand. And if each of us does that once a day, just once a day this week, what a different place the world would be. Are you going to join me? Once a day. Stop, acknowledge your feeling or your thought, and feel gratitude for it. And see what the gratitude does to your body, to your mind, and to the energy and the dialogue. Perhaps we'll all be the kindest drivers in Washington, D.C. Namaste.